You ever hear about those weird rules that don't seem to make sense until you break them? This is the story of a man who did just that and paid the price. A lonely fire lookout station. Strange rules that must be followed, and a presence that shouldn't exist. What happens when you look at something you were never supposed to see? Before we dive into this terrifying story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future stories. Trust me, you'll want to stay updated because some stories stay with you. I took the job as a fire lookout because I needed to get away from my past, from my mistakes, from myself. Sitting in a tower in the middle of nowhere, miles away from civilization, sounded like exactly what I needed. No booze, no arguments, just silence and the endless stretch of pine trees. My supervisor, a guy named Collins, handed me a manual on my first day, full of the usual safety protocols, how to report fires, what to do in case of an emergency, radio check-in times. But there was another section, printed in a different font, almost like it had been added in later. Strict operational rules, it said. I skimmed through them, half interested, until I got to rule number 3. Do not, under any circumstances, look at Tower 14 through the binoculars between 1:13 a.m. and 1:17 a.m. It sounded ridiculous. I laughed a little, wondering if it was some weird initiation joke. I should have taken it more seriously. The first few nights were uneventful. The wind howled through the trees, the radio crackled with the occasional check-in, and I found myself almost enjoying the solitude. Then, on the 5th night, around 1:15 a.m., boredom got the best of me. I remembered the rule. It felt stupid, childish even, but something about forbidden things makes them more tempting. I grabbed my binoculars and aimed them at Tower 14. At first, I saw nothing, just a dark, empty structure in the distance. Then, as I adjusted the focus, something shifted. A shape tall, thin, standing inside the tower, staring directly back at me. No flashlight, no movement, just a figure in the dark. And then, my radio crackled to life. A burst of static erupted from the radio, loud enough to make me flinch. Then, through the crackling, a voice, my voice. James, just that, my name. But it was unmistakably me. I froze, my hands gripping the binoculars so tight my knuckles went white. The figure in Tower 14 hadn't moved, but I felt it watching. The radio crackled again. This time, the voice was different, fainter. You saw it. That wasn't me. That wasn't anyone I recognized. I dropped the binoculars, my breathing shallow, my pulse hammering in my ears. I shut off the radio, convincing myself it was just interference, some weird frequency bouncing through the valley. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had made a mistake. The next morning, I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just overtired. Maybe the isolation was getting to me. I did my rounds, checked for smoke, and stuck to my usual routine. But something was different. The forest felt off. The birds were silent. Not a single branch swayed, even though the wind was strong. Around noon, I found something at the base of my tower, a note, written in my own handwriting. You saw it. Don't look again. I didn't remember writing it. I didn't remember bringing paper down there. My stomach turned to ice. I scanned the trees, half expecting someone to step out. Some prankster, some rational explanation. But there was no one. Just the endless, suffocating stillness of the forest. I went back up the tower, locking the hatch behind me, though I had no idea what I was trying to keep out. I sat by the radio, debating whether to call it in. What would I even say? That I heard my own voice over the radio. That I found a note I didn't write. They'd think I was losing it. Hell, maybe I was. I paced the tiny room, trying to convince myself that there was some logical explanation. But deep down, I knew better. Something had changed when I looked at Tower 14. I had broken a rule, and now I was being watched. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the lights off, sitting by the window, staring out at the forest. The trees felt closer than before, like the whole landscape had shifted while I wasn't looking. At 1:13 a.m., the radio turned on by itself. A slow build of static, then a voice, a whisper. James, you shouldn't have looked. My breath caught in my throat. The voice was familiar, but warped, stretched thin like a recording played at the wrong speed. I didn't touch the radio. I didn't move. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something standing at the edge of the trees. Too far to make out details, but I knew it was facing me. And then, it started moving. It didn't walk, it shifted. 1 second, it was at the tree line. The next, it was closer, 20 feet closer, standing still, watching. I blinked and it moved again. No footsteps, no sound, just these horrifying jumps forward, like a bad signal skipping frames. My hands clenched the arms of my chair. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. It was testing me, seeing if I'd react. I thought about the rules. Was there something in there about this? I didn't remember. All I knew was that I couldn't look away. The figure stopped at the base of my tower. The radio crackled again, and my own voice whispered through the speaker, "Come down." I almost did. My body twitched like something inside me wanted to obey, like it wasn't just my brain in control anymore. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the desk to ground myself. When I opened them, the figure was gone, just gone. No sound, no movement, nothing but the radio. It stayed on. I reached out to turn the dial, but before I could, something else whispered through the static, something that made my stomach drop. It was my wife's voice. "James, let me in." I recoiled from the radio like it had burned me. My wife's ex-wife was hundreds of miles away. She hadn't spoken to me in months, and yet her voice came through the speaker, soft, pleading. "James, please, let me in." I stared at the hatch, at the bolted lock, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. There was no way she was here. No way. My fingers hovered over the radio dial, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it off. A sick part of me needed to hear what it would say next. Then, a knock, not from the radio, from below. A slow, deliberate knock against the metal of the tower. I swear to God, my heart stopped. I gripped the desk, my nails digging into the wood. Another knock, then another, each one perfectly spaced, patient. My throat was dry. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I forced myself to stand, creeping toward the hatch, half expecting to see Herno. It's standing there, but I didn't check. I couldn't. I backed away, pressing myself against the far wall. Then the knocking stopped. Silence for one breath, two. Then the handle turned. I lunged for the hatchet I kept near the door. My fingers fumbled around the wooden handle, slick with sweat. The hatch rattled, the lock straining as if something on the other side was testing it just lightly at first, then harder. The metal groaned under the pressure. My whole body locked up. Every instinct screamed at me to not move, to not make a sound, to pretend I wasn't here. Then the voice returned, but this time it wasn't from the radio. It was right outside the hatch. James, a perfect imitation of her voice, but wrong. Too smooth, too calm, like someone trying to sound human. I clenched my teeth so hard my jaw ached. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that if I answered, if I even acknowledged it, something terrible would happen. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the hatchet so tight my fingers hurt. Don't speak, don't move, don't look. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the handle slowly turned back into place. The hatch creaked as the weight lifted off it. I waited, heart pounding. And then, something whispered from the other side of the door. "You already let me in." Every muscle in my body seized. My grip on the hatchet tightened until my fingers went numb. "You already let me in." The words slithered into my ears, curling around my thoughts like fingers pressing into my skull. I didn't understand what it meant, but the worst part? It sounded right, like a memory I had forgotten, like something I had done without realizing. The air in the tower felt different, thicker, wrong. I turned, scanning the small room. The dim glow of my desk lamp cast long shadows across the wooden walls, flickering slightly like a candle about to go out. My eyes landed on the mirror nailed to the far side of the room, a small, foggy thing I barely paid attention to. Except now, there were two reflections in it. One was mine. The other was standing behind me. I couldn't move. My body locked up in a way I had never experienced before, like my muscles had been disconnected from my brain. The figure in the mirror stood just behind me, too close, almost pressing against my back. My breath turned shallow, each inhale feeling wrong, like I was taking in something heavier than air. I wanted to turn around. Every instinct told me not to. The reflection wasn't perfectly right. It was almost me, same height, same shape, but the head was tilted too far to one side, like it was studying me with a curiosity that felt hungry. My hands in the mirror were empty, but in reality, I was still holding the hatchet. I watched my real fingers tighten around the handle, but the reflection's hands, they just hung loosely at its sides. It wasn't copying me anymore. It was doing its own thing. Then, It smiled. Not a natural smile, not one I had ever seen on my own face. Too wide, too sharp at the edges, stretching past what should have been possible. My stomach dropped, and then without me moving an inch, my reflection lifted a hand and waved at me. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. My reflection, the thing, pretending to be me, stayed perfectly still. Hand frozen mid-wave. My chest tightened, a cold weight pressing against my ribs. I refused to look away, refused to blink. My mind screamed that if I did, if I broke eye contact for even a second, something terrible would happen. Then the lamp flickered. For a heartbeat, the room plunged into darkness. When the light sputtered back on, the mirror was empty. My reflection was gone. I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs, raising the hatchet like it would make a difference. The tower was silent, but the wrong kind of silent, the kind where the air feels too thick, where the shadows seem to breathe. I forced myself to scan the room, every instinct telling me I was not alone. Then the radio crackled to life. No static this time, just breathing, slow, steady, coming from the speaker like whoever was on the other end was right next to the microphone. My own breath hitched. The breathing on the radio stopped. Then a voice, low and calm, spoke 3 words that made my blood run cold. "Turn around, James." I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Every nerve in my body was screaming. Every instinct telling me that if I so much as twitched, I would see something I was never meant to see. My hands trembled around the hatchet. The radio stayed silent now, like it was waiting for me to make a mistake. A floorboard creaked behind me, not from the wind, not from the tower settling. It was a deliberate step. Something was in here with me. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I squeezed my eyes shut, my mind racing back to the manual, the rules. Was there something about this? Some instruction I had missed. My thoughts were scrambled, fear drowning out logic. Then, something moved in my peripheral vision. Not fast, not sudden, slow, like someone standing just behind me, leaning forward. I felt the shift in the air, the way the space around me compressed, like the room itself was breathing. My skin prickled with the undeniable feeling of being watched. My own mind betrayed me, whispering thoughts I didn't want to have. What if it's already touching you? What if it's close enough to feel your breath on its skin? The radio crackled again. This time, the voice wasn't calm. It was distorted, warped, layered with something inhuman. Turn around. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that figure in Tower 14. My breathing had gone shallow, my hands gripping the binoculars so tightly that my knuckles ached. I tried to convince myself it was just another lookout, maybe someone replacing whoever was stationed there before. But deep down, I knew that wasn't right. The way the figure moved slow, deliberate, like it knew I was watching, sent a cold shiver down my spine. Then, as if it had been waiting for me to notice, it raised an arm and waved. Not a casual wave, but something unsettlingly precise, like it was mimicking a human gesture, rather than performing one naturally. A crackling noise filled my radio. Static, at first, then a voice, distorted and uneven, pushing through the interference. "You saw me!" The words dragged out, stretched unnaturally, as if they weren't coming from someone speaking, but from something trying to imitate speech. My stomach twisted. I dropped the binoculars and grabbed the radio, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the dial. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Silence. Then, just as I thought the transmission had ended, the voice came again, clearer this time. "Why did you look?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had gone dry, my heartbeat hammering so loudly I could feel it in my ears. The radio hissed with more static before cutting out entirely, leaving only the sound of the wind against the tower walls. I backed away from the window, every nerve in my body screaming that I had made a mistake, one I couldn't take back. My mind raced through the rules in the manual. Do not look at Tower 14 after dark. Why? What had I just invited into my reality by breaking that rule? Then came the knock. A slow, deliberate knock on the door to my tower. 3 times. Steady, rhythmic, impossible. No one should be here. The stairs leading up to my lookout creaked under what sounded like shifting weight, like someone or something was standing just outside, waiting. I held my breath, willing myself not to move, not to make a sound. Another knock, and then, worse, a voice. My voice. "James, let me in." I felt a deep, primal terror grip me. The voice outside wasn't just similar to mine, it was mine. Every inflection, every subtle breath between the words. It was as if someone had recorded me speaking and was playing it back through some awful, distorted filter. The air in the tower felt heavy, pressing down on my chest. I stayed frozen, my back against the desk, barely breathing. The voice came again, closer this time, as if whatever was out there had pressed its face right against the door. "James, I know you're in there." The door handle rattled, not violently, just enough to let me know it could open if it wanted to. The worst part, the handle didn't just move. It twisted, not in the way a locked door resists, but like something on the other side was testing it, playing with it, like it wasn't bound by normal movement, like it was learning. I didn't dare move. My breathing was shallow, my muscles tensed like a coiled spring. I kept staring at the door, waiting for something, anything to happen, but the voice had gone silent. The only sound was the soft creak of the wooden tower shifting in the wind. My fingers clenched around the edge of the desk, knuckles white. I thought about the rule book. It had said nothing about this. Was this because I had looked at Tower 14? Had I opened some kind of door by breaking the rule? I reached for my radio, hands shaking. "This is Tower 19, I whispered, barely making a sound. "Is anyone there?" Static, just static. I switched channels, trying the emergency frequency. "Tower 19 requesting immediate response. Something is outside my door." Again, only static. I pressed the radio to my forehead, closing my eyes. I wasn't alone in this forest. There were supposed to be other people, but the silence felt absolute, like I had been cut off from the rest of the world, like I wasn't supposed to exist anymore. I took slow, measured breaths, trying to calm myself, but the weight of the silence pressed down on me like a suffocating blanket. My thoughts raced ahead. I truly heard the voice, or was my mind playing tricks on me? The isolation, the paranoia, the eerie atmosphere of this place. It could all be getting to me, but deep down, I knew that voice wasn't my imagination. It wasn't some random trick of the wind. It was real. I swallowed hard and forced myself to stand. My legs felt weak, but I needed to check. The rulebook had said not to look at Tower 14 at certain times, but it didn't say anything about this. Maybe there was a logical explanation. Maybe it was just another lookout playing a prank on me. My fingers trembled as I reached for the doorknob, hesitating for a moment before I twisted it and pulled the door open just a crack, just enough to peek outside. The night was unnaturally still. No wind, no rustling leaves, no distant calls of nocturnal animals, just a vast, suffocating silence. I stepped out onto the balcony, my boots making the wooden planks creak beneath me. The air was thick, charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. I turned my gaze toward Tower 14. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just the dark silhouette of the distant tower standing against the starlit sky. But as my eyes adjusted, a shape became visible near its railing. A figure, still unmoving, watching me. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. I wanted to believe it was another lookout, but something about the way it stood rigid, unnatural, made every instinct in me scream to retreat. I blinked, hoping my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the figure remained perfectly still, its outline stark against the dim glow of the horizon. I felt an unnatural pressure in my chest, like the air itself had thickened around me. Slowly, I lowered my binoculars, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the eerie feeling creeping up my spine. When I raised them again, the figure was gone. But something else had changed. The tower itself looked wrong, subtly distorted, like I was looking at it through warped glass. A deep, unsettling nausea rolled through me. That was when the radio crackled to life, a burst of static that sent my heart hammering against my ribs. A voice emerged from the static, distant hollow, like it was struggling to push through layers of interference. At first, I thought it was my supervisor, but the words were garbled, unintelligible. Then, just as I was about to respond, I heard my own name, James. It wasn't just my name. It was my ex-wife's voice. My stomach dropped. There was no way. No way. She had no idea where I was. She wasn't even supposed to be able to reach me here. But there it was, clear as day, cutting through the static like a knife. "James, why did you do this?" I stumbled back from the radio, nearly knocking over my chair. My breathing turned ragged, my pulse a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I told myself it was some sick joke, maybe a recording, maybe something anything but real. My fingers hovered over the transmitter. I wanted to respond, to ask what the hell was going on, but something inside me screamed not to. Then, the voice changed. It wasn't her anymore. It was deeper, distorted, and it was laughing. I took a step back from the window, my breath catching in my throat. The thing, whatever it was, had been standing there just seconds ago, but now the clearing was empty again, as if nothing had ever been there. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and I could feel the sweat forming on my palms. I scanned the area through my binoculars again, but Tower 14 was dark, lifeless. My radio remained eerily silent, the static humming like white noise in the back of my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. And the worst part, I had no idea what rule I had broken this time. I moved away from the window and sat down heavily in the chair, rubbing my face with both hands. The manual sat on the desk, its pages slightly curled from the humidity. I flipped through it, scanning for anything that could explain what I had just seen. But there was nothing, no mention of figures watching from the tree line, no explanation for why Tower 14 was suddenly abandoned. My gut told me that looking at it had been a mistake, a bigger one than I had realized. And if breaking the first rule had started this nightmare, what else was coming for me? The unease in my chest only grew as I sat there, trying to rationalize what had just happened. Maybe it was exhaustion playing tricks on me. Maybe I had been staring through the binoculars for too long, my brain filling in the blanks with something that wasn't really there. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. I had seen it. Something was out there. And worse, something knew that I had seen it. A sudden noise broke through the static of my radio. Not a voice, not a call, just a low, garbled sound, like someone whispering underwater. My entire body tensed. The sound lasted only a few seconds before the radio went dead silent again, leaving me in a suffocating stillness. I grabbed the receiver with shaky fingers and pressed the button. "This is Tower 19, checking in. Anyone there?" My voice came out steadier than I expected, but no response came, just more silence. I tried again. "Tower 14, do you copy?" I waited, gripping the radio so tightly my knuckles turned white. The silence stretched on, thick and unnatural. Just as I was about to lower the receiver, the static crackled back to life. At first it was just a faint hiss, like a detuned frequency, struggling to catch a signal. Then, through the distortion, a voice. It was warped, distant, and barely more than a whisper, but I swear I recognized it. My own name, drawn out, elongated, like someone calling from deep inside a tunnel. "James." The voice sent a cold shock through my spine. It wasn't just the sound itself, it was the way it felt, as if something was reaching through the radio, pressing against my ears, trying to worm its way into my mind. I dropped the receiver like it had burned me and stumbled back from the console. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. This wasn't interference. This wasn't my imagination. Something was speaking to me, something that shouldn't have been able to. The radio continued to hiss for a few more seconds, then cut out completely. I forced myself to take a deep breath. I needed to stay rational. I needed to bang. A loud, violent knock against the side of the tower made me jump. It came from below, near the base of the structure. The rational part of my brain screamed that it had to be the wind, an animal, something normal. But the way the sound echoed through the empty forest, the sheer force behind it, I knew better. I stood frozen, heart hammering against my ribs. The knock had been deliberate, too strong, too precise to be the wind or an animal. I hesitated, then slowly stepped toward the window, careful not to make a sound. Peering out into the darkness, I scanned the area below with my flashlight. The beam cut through the night, illuminating the sparse trees and the metal stairs leading up to the tower. Nothing, no movement, no sign of life. But then, my stomach clenched. The hatch leading up to the tower was open. I knew for a fact I had locked it. I had triple-checked. I backed away, every instinct screaming at me to barricade the door. My fingers fumbled with the lock, my breath ragged. The tower was supposed to be secure high off the ground, isolated. But something was here, something that didn't need to knock to get inside. The thoughts sent ice through my veins. The manual's warnings came flooding back. Do not respond to knocks after midnight. Was that what this was? Another test, another trick. My mind raced. If I broke another rule, would things escalate again? The air felt thick, charged with something unseen. Then, without warning, my radio crackled back to life. The static on the radio was loud, almost deafening in the silence. My hands trembled as I reached for it, hesitating before pressing the button. But I didn't need to. A voice, low, distorted, broke through the static on its own. "James, you let it in." My entire body went rigid. The voice wasn't coming from HQ or any of the other towers. It was close, too close. It felt like it was coming from inside the tower with me. I spun around, shining my flashlight into every corner of the cabin, my pulse thudding in my ears. The room was empty, but the air felt wrong, like I wasn't alone. My eyes darted to the hatch, still hanging open, swaying slightly in the wind. I was about to move toward it when something shifted in my peripheral vision. The chair by the desk, the one I had been sitting in just minutes ago, was now facing me. I was sure I had left it turned toward the desk. My breath caught in my throat. That feeling, that oppressive weight of being watched, pressed down on me so hard I thought I might collapse. Then, the knocking started again. Not from the door this time, from inside the room. I don't even know where to start with this, guys. I'm posting this because I need anyone to tell me they've been through something like this. Because I'm losing my damn mind trying to figure out what happened to me up in Tower 19. It was supposed to be a simple gig. Just sit up there, watch for fires, report anything weird. But that day, after I broke that stupid rule about looking at Tower 14 through the binoculars, everything went to hell. It was March 17th, 2025, and I swear, I've never felt fear like that in my life. The knocking started inside the room inside, not from the hatch or the walls, but right behind me, like something was standing on the floorboards with me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe right. My flashlight was shaking in my hand, and the beam kept jumping around the room, catching nothing but the desk, the chair, the radio. But I knew something was there. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest, and I could hear this faint creak-like weight shifting on Woodex. It wasn't me moving. I'd been up there alone for days, and now it didn't feel alone anymore. The tower itself, it's this rickety old thing, perched up on stilts in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by pines that stretch out forever. It's all weathered wood, splintered in spots, with this musty smell like damp rot that never goes away. The windows are big, too big, letting you see way too much of the dark outside. And the hatch at the bottom of the stairs is this heavy metal thing that clangs when you shut it. I'd locked it. I know I did, but it didn't matter. That knocking, it was sharp, like someone rapping their knuckles on the floor. And it came in threes. 3 slow knocks, then silence, then 3 more. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I'd puke. I kept telling myself it was the wind, or maybe the tower settling. But deep down I knew that was bullshit. Whatever I'd seen in Tower 14 had followed me back here. I could feel it watching me, like eyes boring into the back of my neck. The radio was still on, just hissing static. And I swear the static sounded like it was breathing slow, in and out, like it was alive. I just stood there, frozen, with that damn knocking echoing in my ears. The tower felt smaller all of a sudden, like the walls were creeping in on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was making that sound was close to close. I finally got the guts to swing my flashlight around again, real slow, checking every corner. The beam caught the mirror on the wall, that foggy little square I never bothered with, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move in it. Not me, just a shadow, quick, like it ducked out of sight. My stomach dropped, and I yanked the light away, not wanting to look too long. The knocking stopped, just like that, and the silence was worse. It was thick, suffocating, like the whole forest outside was holding its breath. I kept my back to the wall, my fingers digging into the splintered wood behind me, trying to ground myself. But then the radio kicked up again, not static this time, but a voice. My voice. "James, why'd you do it?" it said, clear as day, and I nearly dropped the flashlight. "That tower, it's a lonely place. All right, the inside's bare, just a desk cluttered with maps, a creaky chair, and that radio that's older than I am. The windows rattle when the wind picks up, and the floor's got these uneven spots that groan under your boots." I'd gotten used to it, or thought I had, but now every little detail felt wrong. The air smelled sharper, like ozone after a storm, even though it hadn't rained. I could hear my own breathing, too loud in that quiet. And it didn't help that the voice on the radio sounded exactly like me alike. It had ripped it right out of my throat. I stumbled over to the desk, hands shaking, and stared at the radio like it was gonna bite me. "Who's there?" I whispered, not even sure I wanted an answer. Nothing came back at first, just that low hum. But then it laughed, not my laugh, but something twisted, like it was mocking me. The sound crawled under my skin, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped, like something cold had just stepped inside with me. I couldn't take my eyes off that radio, like if I looked away, it'd do something worse. My hands were sweaty, slipping on the flashlight, and I kept it aimed at the desk like it was some kind of shield. That laugh-it wasn't human. Not really. It was too deep, too jagged, like something was scraping it out of a hole in the ground. I wanted to turn the damn thing off, but my gut told me that'd be a mistake, like it'd piss whatever this was off even more. The tower felt alive now. Not just a creaky old shack, but something watching me back. The windows, I could see them in the corner of my eye. Pitch black outside, and I had this sick feeling that if I turned, I'd see something pressed up against the glass. My chest was tight, like I couldn't get a full breath. And every time I blinked, I swore the shadows in the room stretched a little longer. Then the floor creaked again, not under me, but across the room by the hatch. I hadn't heard it open, but I knew I'd locked it. I knew it. The hatch is this rusty metal slab, bolted shut with a latch that sticks half the time. It's loud when it moves, screeches like a banshee, so there's no way something could have opened it without me hearing. But that creak, it was real, and it came from right where the hatch sits in the floor. I swung the flashlight over, my heart jackhammering, and the beam lit up the metal. It was still closed, still locked, but the latchet was bent. Not a lot, just enough to notice, like something had yanked on it hard and given up. My mouth went dry. I hadn't touched it since I climbed up that morning, and no one else was supposed to be out here. The air around it felt wrong, colder than the rest of the room, and I swear I saw my breath fog for a second. That's when I noticed the smell like burnt hair, faint but sharp, stinging my nose. Whatever I'd let in by looking at Tower 14. It wasn't just watching anymore, it was messing with me, testing how far it could push. I backed up from the hatch so fast I slammed into the desk, knocking a stack of maps onto the floor. The papers scattered everywhere, and for a second, I just stared at them, like my brain couldn't process anything else. That bent latchet wasn't right. I'd checked it 100 times since I got here, paranoid about bears or whatever else might wander up those stairs. But this wasn't an animal. Animals don't knock from inside your damn room. My flashlight beam was shaking now, jumping all over the place, and I forced myself to steady it on the hatch again. The metal looked dull under the light, almost like it was soaking it up instead of reflecting it. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was right under there, waiting, listening to me freak out. The burnt hair smell got stronger, mixing with that damp rot stink the tower always had, and it made my eyes water. I gagged, covering my mouth with my sleeve, but it didn't help. The air felt like it was sticking to me. The tower's walls, they're thin, just planks nailed together, with gaps you can feel the wind through sometimes. That night though, there was no wind, no sound from outside at all. It was like the forest had gone dead, and all I could hear was my own pulse thudding in my ears. I kept glancing at the windows, expecting hell. I don't know what I expected. A face, maybe, or that figure from Tower 14 staring back. Nothing was there, just black, but it didn't feel empty. I grabbed the hatchet off the desk, the one I kept for splitting kindling, and held it tight. The weight felt good, real, something I could swing if I had to. But then the radio hissed again, and my ex-wife's voice came through, soft and pleading. "James, let me in." My knees almost gave out. She's nowhere near here, hundreds of miles away. Last I knew, and yet it was her, down to the little catch in her throat when she's upset. I stared at the radio, bile rising in my throat, knowing it wasn't her, but wanting it to be so bad it hurt. I don't know how long I stood there, gripping that hatchet, staring at the radio like it was gonna lunge at me. Hearing her voice, my ex-wife's voice coming out of that thing, was like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she sounded. So real, like she was right outside begging to come in. But I knew she wasn't. She couldn't be. I'd cut myself off from everyone when I took this job, trying to outrun the mess I'd made of us. My hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped the hatchet, and I had to lean against the desk just to stay upright. The radio went quiet again, but the silence didn't feel safe. Felt like whatever was out there was waiting for me to crack. I kept telling myself it was some kind of trick, maybe a signal bouncing weird through the valley. But that didn't explain the knocking, or the hatch, or any of this crap. The tower was closing in, the walls feeling tighter, and I swear the shadows were moving just outside the flashlight's reach. The desk lamp flickered then, just a quick stutter, and my heart jumped into my throat. That lamp's old, wired into the tower's shaky generator, but it had never done that before. I swung the flashlight around, half expecting to see something standing in the corner, but it was just me and the mess I'd made, knocking those maps over. The light steadied, but now the room looked wrong, like the angles were off. The mirror caught my eye again, and I made the mistake of looking. My reflection was there, pale and sweaty, but the edges of it were blurry, like the glass was smudged. I blinked, and for a second, just a damn second didn't blink back. My breath hitched, and I jerked the light away, muttering nope, 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 under my breath like that'd fix anything. That burnt hair smell was thick now, choking me, and I could feel the floor vibrating, faint but steady, like something was pacing under it. Whatever I'd let in, it wasn't just playing with me. Anymore, it was settling in. I couldn't stay still anymore standing. There waiting for something to happen was driving me nuts. I started pacing, keeping the hatchet in one hand and the flashlight in the other, sweeping the beam across the room like it'd keep whatever this was away. The floorboards groaned under my boots, louder than they should have, and every step made that faint vibration worse, like the tower itself was humming with something alive. I kept my eyes off the mirror, off the windows, just focusing on the desk and the radio, trying to pretend I had some kind of control. But that smell, that burnt hair stench, it was everywhere now, sticking to my clothes, my skin. I gagged again, and this time I couldn't stop it. My stomach heaved, and I barely made it to the trash can by the desk before I puked. It wasn't much, just bile, but it left me shaking worse than before. I wiped my mouth with my sleeve, and that's when I noticed the maps on the floor. They weren't where I'd left them. They'd shifted, like someone had nudged them into a pile while I wasn't looking. The tower's got this little space, maybe 15 feet across, all open except for the desk and a rickety shelf in the corner. There's nowhere to hide, nowhere something could have moved those maps without me seeing. But they were stacked now, neat, not scattered like when I'd knocked them over. My chest tightened, and I swung the flashlight down at them, half expecting to see handprints or something crazy. Nothing, just the paper, yellowed and crinkled. But it freaked me out more than if there'd been blood on them. I kicked the pile, scattering them again, and the second my boot hit the floor, the knocking started back up. Not from the hatch this time, from the walls. 3 slow knocks, then a pause, then 3 more, like it was circling me. The sound bounced around the room, and I spun, trying to follow it, but it was everywhere at once. My head was pounding, and I yelled, "Stop it!" before I could think better of it. Big mistake, the knocking stopped, and the radio screamed to life with static so loud it hurt my ears. That static blast from the radio hit me like a slap, and I dropped the hatchet, clapping my hands over my ears. It was so loud, it felt like my skull was rattling, and I stumbled back, tripping over the chair and landing hard on my ass. The flashlight rolled away, beams spinning across the room, lighting up the walls in quick flashes. I scrambled to grab it, my hands shaking so bad I could barely close my fingers around it. The static cut off as fast as it started, and the silence slammed back in, heavy and wrong. I stayed on the floor for a second, panting, trying to get my bearings. But the air felt thicker now, like I was breathing through a wet rag. I could still hear my own voice, echoing in my head from earlier. "Why'd you do it?" And it made me want to scream. I'd looked at Tower 14 because I was bored, because I thought the rules were dumb. Now I was paying for it, and I didn't even know what it was. The knocking in the walls was gone, but I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for the next thing, the next move. The tower's got these big windows all around, like a fishbowl stuck up on stilts, and I'd always liked that. Few miles of trees, nothing else. But now those windows felt like a trap, like eyes staring in at me instead of out. I forced myself up, grabbing the hatchet again, and crept toward the desk to kill the radio for good. My boots crunched on something glass, I thought at first, but it was the maps, stiff and crackling like they'd dried out in seconds. I didn't look down, didn't want to see if they'd moved again. I reached for the radio dial, and right as my fingers brushed it, the lamp flickered hard, 3 quick blinks, then out. The room went dark except for my flashlight, and I froze, breath stuck in my throat. Something scraped across the floor behind me, not loud, just a slow drag, like nails on wood. I didn't turn around, couldn't. My whole body locked up, and I just stood there, staring at the dead radio, praying I'd imagined it. But the scraping came again, closer, and I felt the air shift like something had moved right up behind me. I don't know how I didn't scream right then. That scraping, it was real, no question. And it was so close, I could feel the air move against the back of my neck. My flashlight was shaking in my hand, the beam jerking all over the desk, and I wanted to turn around so bad, but every part of me was yelling not to. I kept my eyes locked on the radio, like if I stared hard enough, it'd keep me safe. The hatchet was slick in my grip, sweat making it hard to hold, and I tightened my fingers around it anyway. The scraping stopped, but the silence wasn't a relief, it was worse. Like whatever was back there was just waiting for me to slip up, My throat was so dry I could barely swallow, and my legs felt like jelly, but I couldn't stay frozen forever. I took a shaky step forward, closer to the desk, and the floor creaked under me loud, too loud. Right away, something creaked back, mimicking me like it was stepping when I did. My stomach twisted, and I bit my lip hard enough to taste blood, trying to keep from losing it completely. The tower's ceiling is low, barely clears my head, and it's got these exposed beams that always made me feel a little claustrophobic. Now, though, it was like they were pressing down, making the whole place feel like a coffin. I risked a quick glance up, just with my eyes, not my head, and the shadows up there looked wrong too thick, like something was hanging off the beams. My flashlight beam swung up before I could stop myself, and for a split second, I thought I saw something long, thin, dangling, but it was gone when the light hit it full on. I yanked the beam back down, heart slamming against my ribs, and told myself it was just the dark messing with me. But that burnt hair smell was choking me now, mixed with something sour, like sweat or fear. And I realized it may have been me. I was drenched, shirt sticking to my back. Then the radio clicked, not static, just a single sharp click, like someone flipped it on. My voice came through again, low and slow. "James, you're not alone." I almost puked again right there. I couldn't handle hearing my own voice like that again. It was too much, like something had ripped it out of me and was throwing it back in my face. I lunged at the radio, slamming my hand down on the power switch, and the thing went dead, thank God. But the second it shut off, the scraping started again, louder this time, like whatever it was didn't like me cutting it off. It came from the corner by the shelf, that rickety thing where I kept a couple cans of food and a spare battery. I swung the flashlight over, and the beam caught the edge of the shelf, just the edge, because it was shaking. Not a lot, just a little tremble, like something was leaning on it or brushing past. My breath was coming in short gasps now, and I gripped the hatchet so hard my knuckles ached. I took a step toward it, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. No, I had to see if it was real. The shaking stopped right as I got close, and one of the cans, a dented old thing of beans, rolled off and hit the floor with a dull thud. It didn't bounce, didn't roll far, just stopped, like something caught it. The tower's shelf is nothing special, just some planks nailed together, wobbly as hell, and it's always been a little uneven. But that can didn't fall on its own night. Stacked them tight, made sure they wouldn't tip over when the wind rattled the place. Now, though, the whole shelf looked off, like it was leaning more than usual, and the shadows behind it were too dark, even with the flashlight on them. I couldn't see anything back there, but I felt it, something watching, waiting. My skin was crawling, and I backed up quick, bumping into the chair again. The thud of that can still echoed in my head, and I kept thinking about how it stopped so fast, like a hand had grabbed it. Then the knocking came back, but this time it was different, faster, erratic, coming from all over the walls, like something was running around the outside of the tower. I spun around, trying to track it, but it was too quick, and my flashlight couldn't keep up. My chest was heaving, and I yelled, "Leave me alone!" before I could stop myself. Stupid, so stupid, because the knocking stopped dead, and something banged hard on the hatch, shaking the whole floor. That bang on the hatch was so loud, I swear the whole tower shook like something huge had slammed into it from below. I stumbled, catching myself on the desk, and the flashlight slipped out of my hand, rolling under the chair. I dropped to my knees, scrambling to grab it, my fingers brushing the cold floorboards while my heart pounded like it was gonna burst. The hatchet was still in my other hand, and I held it up like it'd do any good against whatever was out there. The beam flickered when I snatched the flashlight back, and I swung it toward the hatch, still locked, still bent, but now there was a dent in the metal. A big one, like something had punched it from underneath. My stomach flipped, and I couldn't stop staring at it, waiting for it to move again. The air was freezing now, my breath puffing out in little clouds, and that burnt hair smell was so strong, I could taste it like it was coating my tongue. I backed up until I hit the wall, the rough wood digging into my back, and just stood there, panting, listening. Nothing happened for a second, and I thought maybe it was done then. The radio clicked back on by itself. I didn't even touch the damn thing, it had been off. I made sure of it, but now it was alive again, humming low. My ex-wife's voice came through, soft and sad. "James, why won't you let me in?" It hit me like a knife, twisting in my chest, because it sounded so real, so much like her when we'd fight and she'd beg me to talk. But this wasn't her. I knew it wasn't, and that made it worse. The tower's radio is this ancient box, all dials and static. perched on the desk like it owns the place, and now it was talking to me like it knew me. I stared at it, my hands shaking, and the voice kept going. James, I'm cold out here. I wanted to smash it, just grab the hatchet and bash it to pieces, but I couldn't move. The windows rattled, then not wind, because there was none, just a quick shake, like something outside was testing them. My head snapped up, and I caught a glimpse of movement in the glass. Just a flicker, too fast to make out, but it was there. My whole body went rigid, and I realized I wasn't just trapped in here, I was being hunted. I couldn't look at the windows anymore. Every time I did, I swore I saw something dart past, just out of reach of the flashlight. I kept the beam on the hatch instead, that dented metal staring back at me like a warning. My ex-wife's voice was still coming through the radio. Looping now, James. I'm cold. Let me in. And it was digging into my head, making me feel guilty and terrified all at once. I slammed my fist down on the desk, right next to the radio, and yelled, "Shut up!" like that'd do anything. The voice stopped mid-sentence, and the silence hit hard, but it didn't feel like a win. My hand stung from the hit, and I could feel the sweat dripping down my face, mixing with the cold air. The tower was messing with knew it was like it was alive and screwing with my head on purpose. The floor vibrated again, just a little, and I stepped back quick, almost tripping over the scattered maps. That's when I noticed something under the desk, a shadow that didn't match mine, stretched out long and thin, like it was reaching for me. The desk's, this heavy old thing, scratched up and wobbly, shoved against the wall under one of the big windows. It's where I'd sit and stare out at the trees, pretending I had my shit together. But now it felt like ground zero for whatever was happening. I swung the flashlight down, and the shadow vanished, just gone, like it had never been there. My breath was ragged, and I rubbed my eyes with my sleeve, thinking maybe I was losing it, but the feeling didn't go away. Something was under there, or had been, and I wasn't about to stick my head down to check. The hatchet felt useless in my hand, like, what was I gonna do? Chop the air. The radio clicked again. No voice this time, just a low hum that made my teeth ache. Then the knocking started back up, not the walls, not the hatch, but the ceiling. Slow, heavy thumps, like something was walking up there, right over my head. I tilted the flashlight up, and the beams looked normal. No shadows, no shapes, but the sound kept going, steady and deliberate, like it was pacing right above me. Those thumps on the ceiling, they were loud, like boots stomping, but too slow, too careful to be human. I stood there, flashlight pointed up, watching the beams shake every time it hit, little clouds of dust trickling down. My neck was killing me from craning it, but I couldn't look awake, couldn't risk not knowing where it was. The tower's roof is flat, just tar and gravel up there. No railings, nothing to stop something from walking around. I'd been up there once to check the antenna, and it's a straight drop to the ground if you slip. No way anything should have been up there. But the thumps kept coming, moving from one side of the room to the other. My mouth was dry, and I kept swallowing, trying to keep my breathing steady, but it wasn't working. The hatchet was heavy in my hand, and I gripped it tighter, like it'd help if whatever it was decided to come through. Then it stopped mid-step, just silence, and I heard something else, a faint scratching, like nails dragging across the tar, right above me. I lowered the flashlight slow, my arms shaking, and that's when I saw the mirror again. It's nailed to the wall by the shelf, this cloudy little thing that always made me look half dead, but now it was worse. My reflection was there. Yeah, but it was wrong. My face was too pale, my eyes too wide, and my mouth wasn't moving, even though I was breathing hard. I stared, and it stared back, and then it blinked, slow, deliberate. When I didn't, my stomach dropped, and I stumbled back, hitting the chair so hard it scraped across the floor. The scratching above me picked up, faster now, like it was pissed I'd noticed the mirror. The air got colder, sharp against my skin, and that burnt hair smell mixed with something new at earth, like a grave. I swung the flashlight around, half expecting to see dirt piling up in the corners, but it was just the same old tower wood, windows, and that damn radio humming low. Except now I could feel it, the whole place was alive, and it wasn't on my side. I couldn't stop staring at the ceiling after that scratching started up. It was frantic now, like whatever was up there was clawing to get in. The flashlight beam shook in my hand, catching those beams again, and I swore I saw something move, just a flicker, like a shadow slipping between them. My chest was so tight I could barely breathe, and I kept backing up until I hit the wall by the windows. the cold glass pressing against my back. I didn't want to turn around, didn't want to see what might be out there, but the scratching was getting louder, and I could hear little bits of gravel pinging off the roof, like it was digging through. The hatchet felt like dead weight. What was I gonna do? Climb up there and fight it? My head was spinning, and I kept thinking about that rule I broke. How looking at Tower 14 had kicked all this off. I'd been an idiot, and now something was here, tearing at my sanity one sound at a time. Then the radio kicked in, again not my voice, not hers, just a low growl, like something big breathing into it. The tower's windows are old, single pane, with these rusty frames that stick when you try to open them. I'd never bothered there just for looking out, not escaping, but now they felt like a weak spot, like something could smash through any second. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder, and the glass was fogged up not from my breath, but from the outside, like something warm was pressing against it. My stomach lurched, and I jerked the flashlight over, but the beam didn't show anything, just the fog, thick and smeary, with streaks like fingers had dragged through it. I whipped back around, heart hammering, and the scratching above stopped dead. The silence was worse, felt like the thing had heard me, like it knew I'd seen the window. My legs were trembling, and I slid down the wall a little, crouching, trying to make myself small. The growl on the radio got louder, then cut off, and something thumped hard against the floor right in the middle of the room, like it had dropped from the ceiling while I wasn't looking. That thump in the middle of the room, I swear it shook the whole damn tower, like something heavy had landed right on the floorboards. I snapped the flashlight up, my breath catching in my throat, and the beam hit the spot, dead on, just empty wood, scuffed and scratched, but nothing there. My brain was screaming that I'd heard it, felt it, but my eyes were telling me different, and it made me dizzy, like I couldn't trust anything anymore. I stayed crouched by the window, the cold glass biting into my back, and swept the light around slow, checking every inch. The hatchet was still in my hand, slick with sweat, and I kept it raised, even though I didn't know what I'd swing at. The air was so thick now, like it was pushing against me, and that wet earth smell was stronger, mixing with the burnt hair into something that made my guts twist. I kept waiting for another sound, another move, but it was just me and the hum of the radio, except it wasn't plugged in anymore. I'd yanked the cord out earlier, and it was still lying there on the floor, coiled up like a snake. The tower's floor is this patchwork of old planks, some warped from water, some splintered, and it's always creaked under my weight. But that thump wasn't a creak, was solid, deliberate, like something dropped from a height. I forced myself to stand, legs wobbly, and took a step toward the middle of the room, flashlight shaking in my grip. The beam caught something, little specks of dirt, fresh and dark, scattered across the floor where the thump had hit. My mouth went dry, and I bent down, not touching it, just looking. It wasn't there before I'd swept the place that morning, bored out of my mind. Now it was like something had tracked it in, or fallen with it. I glanced up at the ceiling again, and one of the beams had a crack in it, small, fresh, with splinters sticking out. My heart sank. Whatever was up there wasn't just pacing anymore, it was breaking through. Then the mirror caught my eye again, and this time my reflection wasn't alone. Something tall and blurry stood behind it, just out of focus, watching me. I couldn't look at that mirror anymore, whatever was in there with my reflection. It wasn't me, and it wasn't staying blurry. I swung the flashlight away, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd pass out, and focused on the dirt on the floor. It was real gritty under my boot when I nudged it, and that crack in the ceiling beam was staring down at me like a bad omen. The tower was falling apart, Tor. Something was tearing it apart, and I was stuck in the middle. The thumping started again, not just above now, but all around Wall's floor, ceiling, like the whole place was alive and pissed. I yelled, "What do you want?" And my voice cracked, sounding small against the noise. The hatchet felt useless, but I swung it anyway, just at the air, desperate to do something. The thumps stopped, and the radio kicked on my voice, this time, slow and cold. "You let me in, James." I froze, bile rising in my throat, because it wasn't just words, it was a promise. The towers, this rickety cage, all wood and rust, and it's never felt safe. But now it was a damn prison. The windows rattled harder, the fog on them smearing into streaks, and I swore I saw handprints, big ones, press against the glass before vanishing. My legs gave out, and I dropped to my knees, flashlight clattering beside me. The air was freezing, my breath fogging up, and that smell, burnt hair, wet earth, was choking me. The knocking came back, rapid fire, from every direction, and the hatch started shaking, the dent buckling like something was slamming it from below. I crawled to the desk, dragging the hatchet, and hid under it like a kid-like. That'd save me. The radio kept going, my voice looping. You let me in. And then it switched her voice, my ex-wife's, screaming, "James, help me." I covered my ears, shaking, and that's when the floorboards in the middle of the room splintered open, dirt spilling up like something was clawing through. The knock came from behind me, not from the door, not from the hatch, but from inside the room. I froze. My mind went completely blank, my body refusing to move. The only sound was the rapid, uneven rhythm of my own breathing. Slowly, without turning my head, I let my eyes shift toward the corner of the room where the sound had come from. There was nothing there, just the wooden walls, the small desk, and the chair still facing me, still wrong. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. My ears were still ringing from the sharp, deliberate sound of knuckles against wood. My grip on the flashlight tightened until my fingers ached. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to take a step forward, then another. The floor creaked under my weight, loud in the unnatural silence. My mouth was dry. My entire body was tense. Every muscle coiled so tight it felt like my bones might snap. Then the air changed. It was subtle at first. A shift in temperature, a sudden pressure against my eardrums like the air in the room had thickened. The small lamp on my desk flickered, casting erratic shadows against the walls. My instincts screamed at me to run. But where? I was already inside. There was nowhere to go. And then the voice returned. Not from the radio, not from outside, from right behind me. You shouldn't have looked. I don't know if I screamed. I don't know if I moved. All I remember is the cold rush of terror flooding my veins, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. I spun around, swinging the flashlight in a wide arc. The beam cut through the darkness empty, nothing there. But the words still hung in the air, thick and suffocating, like they had weight. I backed away, pressing myself against the far wall. My hands were shaking so badly the flashlight jittered in my grip. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I tried to force myself to think, to move, to do anything. Then, the chair slid across the floor. Not a nudge, not a wobble. It scraped forward, slow and deliberate, stopping just a foot away from me. My stomach lurched. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. My legs were trembling. I wanted to believe it was some trick of gravity, that maybe the floor wasn't as even as it looked. But I knew better. The chair hadn't just moved. It had been moved. Then, the radio clicked on. At first, just static. A low, humming white noise that filled the room like an eerie pulse. Then a voice. My voice. "James, let me in." No, 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 no. My throat closed up. My vision tunneling. I could barely breathe. The words repeated, distorted, drawn out like a warped recording. My name stretched into something inhuman. The voice was wrong, off, like it was trying to sound like me but didn't fully understand how. And then, the final whisper, "You already did." I dropped the flashlight. The bulbs shattered on impact, plunging the room into darkness. I still don't remember how I got out of there. Maybe I ran. Maybe I blacked out and woke up outside. All I know is that one moment I was in the tower, and the next I was sprinting through the forest. The wind cutting against my skin, my lungs burning with every breath. I didn't stop. Not until I reached the ranger station. Not until I saw the lights. By the time I could explain what happened, Tower 14 was empty again. No records of anyone being stationed there. No signs that anyone had been in my tower except for me. They sent someone to replace me the next day. I didn't warn them, I just left. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I swear I can still hear the radio crackling, like it's waiting, like it's still calling my name.